Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Swiss pistol Ordnance model of 1900, the original Luger. Let's go ahead and get this beauty into the light box. With an overall length of 9.4 inches and weighing in just under 2 pounds, the elegant Luger is deceptively large. That's because it is a full-size service handgun, with a detachable single-stack box magazine that chambers the 7.65 Parabellum cartridge. And of course, we all recognize the infamous toggle lock.
This episode at its release was delayed by 1 month due to illness. In that time, we still managed a record t-shirt fundraiser to keep the show going. So this November, we just want to say that we're thankful for all of you out there who not only enjoy, but support firearms history.
Now, I know we've done our fair share of remake episodes, but in this case, don't get too excited. We are not going to be revisiting the P08 or the LP08 anytime soon. Although I can assure you, we are much better at parsing and sharing that kind of data now. Maybe one day, huh? Instead, this episode, and the next one, are sort of a prequel because we did not have a chance to explore the first Luger pistol both in Switzerland and actually the first Luger pistol in Germany as well. More on that in our next episode. For today, we have to explore the very beginnings of this particular pistol, which means we have to sort of put it aside along with the name Luger for just a moment because first up is a man by the name of Hugo Borchardt. Born in Magdeburg, province of Saxony in June of 1844, Hugo grew up in a large industrial town featuring metalworking factories like Krupp Grussen and even ammo manufacturers. Now, I've actually read a couple of slightly varying accounts on Hugo's early life, but thankfully it gets a bit firmer later on, so some of this may need some more digging by a later biographer. It's likely he had training as an engineer or at least machine tool experience because by 1865 he'd apparently emigrated to the United States and was employed by the Pioneer Breech-Loading Arms Company. Apparently his experience was enough to earn him a role as superintendent, but not enough to float the short-lived firm. He then went on to foreman at the Singer Sewing Machine Company. This lasted only a short while before he moved on to Colt's Patent Firearms Company. By 1873, however, he showed up again, now working for Winchester, which is where he applied for a patent on a method for machining lubrication grooves in bullets. Now, that apparent stint at Colt followed by employment with Winchester right at the years where they sort of probed a whole new product line has led many to speculate that Borchardt may have played a role in the very brief Colt-Winchester War. The potentially apocryphal story is that Colt wandered into the lever rifle market with the Colt Burgess in 1883, and that same year, Winchester put a shot across Colt's bow with a double-action revolver designed by Colt's own William Mason, along with a man named Stephen Wood. Supposedly, this was settled in a gentleman's agreement to leave each other's markets alone. However, those dates don't really work. Winchester seems to have been poking at revolvers since the 1870s, and there are apparently some signs that Borchardt was involved in that early process. But that would mean the revolver was not a response to the much later Colt Burgess rifle, maybe just something they thankfully had semi-ready to put out there and spook the competition. Definitely a story I'd like to unpack some other day, though. Returning to Borchardt, he had left Winchester back in 1876, as he had been appointed superintendent at the Sharps rifle factory. At Sharps, he would develop a new breech-loading rifle of some renown. Despite managing roughly 22,500 rifles produced, Borchardt's design couldn't save the Sharps company, which was shuttered in 1880. Dang, our man cannot catch a break longer than 5 years, it seems. So from here, he returned to Europe and secured a position in Hungary. By 1882, he's working with Feggewehr Egyptjahr. Yep, the same Feg we've seen before. Apparently by 1889, he rose to managing director, although some sources say that he was the works manager. In this position, he likely oversaw early tests of the Maxim machine gun. We'll see this is important later. From 1890 through roughly 1892, he was back in the USA. Specifically, he had been employed by Remington this time in order to help out with modifications of the Lee rifle for Army trials. The reason for his expertise is that while he had been at Sharps, they had been the original licensee of the Lee rifle, and Borchardt had already experienced a lot in terms of adapting it for manufacture. The result was the Remington Lee Model 1892, which, had it won US trials, would have meant a long career for Borchardt at the Remington production line. Unfortunately, as we know, the Krag Jorgensen would win the day, and the Lee would find better luck in Britain. Again, not the luckiest man, but he would soldier on, and by 1892, it seems he was in the employ of the massive Ludwig Lowe group, which is where he would receive enough support to develop his very own handgun. The result was a toggle-locked, there's that Maxim influence by the way, smokeless powder-driven, bottlenecked case, small bore projectile pistol with a very strange rear extension, which was responsible for both breaking the lock open and providing spring tension for its return. However, it did rather smartly use detachable box magazines, which were housed in the grip. Here's how it goes. Load it up, rack the action, then pull the trigger. Cartridge is fired, the action travels back a wee bit, unlocks, and then flings the spent case out. Then it starts to return, picks up a new round, shoves it in the chamber, and we're ready to fire again. Now this wasn't the first pistol to accomplish this, but when it was invented, it was the best to do so thanks to an intersection of having fairly good reliability, not what we'd expect today, but back then very good, and having a pretty dang powerful cartridge, which by the way later testimony reveals was probably developed by another Lowe employee, more on him in a moment. But this was a high velocity, high damage cartridge coming out of a pistol, very new at the time. And the end result of Borchardt's work, the construction of 1893 or C93. Now I want you all to just take a moment and let it sink in how this pistol looks almost modern. The magazine is in the right place, the trigger and action are in the right places, the barrel is of course in the right place. And if it weren't for that dead vertical grip, or that weird tumor on the back, you'd probably think it was from the Great War era, some 20 years later. For its day, however, this gun was high-tech, and it immediately drew attention. Most notably in Switzerland, where they had actually been curiously poking at autoloading pistols thanks to the efforts of Theodor Bergmann. Their established sidearm was the Swiss 1882 service revolver, adopted as a small-bore black powder gun. This was lovely for mild recoil and reliable operation, but the ballistics left something to be desired, and the Swiss found revolvers were not ideal for getting the most out of later smokeless powder, thanks to the gap between the cylinder and the barrel. Given the use of a pistol as a close-range defensive device, the Swiss wanted better capacity, a higher rate of fire, and better muzzle velocity, while also preserving accuracy and minimizing the weight of the individual piece. Bergmann attempted Swiss adoption with his own early lock breech design. This had a number of issues, so he would put forward a series of blowback models afterwards. None of these succeeded in Switzerland, but they did open the door for automatics in general. Ludwig Lowe, with their Borchardt pistol, would attempt to step on through. The C93 was in many ways superior to the Bergmann, more reliable, more powerful ammunition, fed from detachable box magazines that could be adapted to any number of rounds really. It was clearly superior to the revolver, except for just a couple snags. Compared to the Swiss 1882, the C93 was heavy, clumsy handling, and complicated to operate and maintain. In addition, it was fragile and expensive. Basically, the gun was the size and weight of a small carbine, nowhere near appropriate for carrying on the hip. Ah, but wait, we can fix this. See? A stock. Now it is a small carbine. Okay, not great, but it's still a technical marvel for its time, and at that moment, a gun without clear competition. Well, that was until the preliminary Swiss trials in June of 1897, which is when the real competitor showed up. That's right, Bergmann is still in this, and now here comes Mannlicher, and after that, Mauser, the big hitter. And boy did the C96 mop the floor for a short while there. If you'd like to know more about that story, check out our other episodes on the would-be usurper. Honestly, the C96 caused a lot of problems for the Borchardt, which had to be confusing because both were under the Lowe group. After showing the C93 around for several years, Lowe was actually in the process of producing several thousand pistols. They had set up an assembly line at Hallmannsstrasse Works in Berlin. With no Marshall contracts whatsoever, it was starting to become a bit of a risky investment. Now here comes Mauser with a clearly better product. Mannlicher, Bergmann, Roth, and others are also kind of circling. They need a clearly superior gun, and soon. So, if they really want to win this, they can either bank on their own C96 through Mauser Group, or they can get Borchardt to really rework the gun. They opted for both. "Hey Borchardt, we need this to be a little smaller." And his response? "Nah, it's fine the way it is." You see, Borchardt was a civilian engineer. He felt the military boys were asking too much. The thing works fine, suck it up and carry it around. Also, he's kind of busy right now. There's a lot of money in these new popular gas appliance markets. Oh man, Hugo has wandered off the mark. Who else can we turn to fix this mess? Well, there is this one guy who has been loosely involved in the process so far. An engineer who is actually former military. Georg Luger. Born March 6, 1849 in Steinach am Brenner, a Tyrolean town in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he was the son of a surgeon and, having completed grammar school, attended a high school in Padua, today in northern Italy, but at the time, another region in the empire. From there, Luger attended the Royal Privileged Business School in Vienna. In December of 1867, Georg joined the Austro-Hungarian army as a volunteer officer cadet. His military career would bring him to the School of Musketry at Bruck, and by 1871, he was an accountant and pay NCO, so doesn't actually sound like the life of an engineer, does it? From here, he transferred to the Army Reserve and takes up a civilian job as an accountant at a bank in Vienna. From 1876 until 1881, we see his job listed as a clerk in private employ. In December of 1878, he was promoted to lieutenant in the Landwehr, and starting in 1882, his private trade suddenly changes over to Waffentechniker. How or why he achieved this job, I have no idea. Luger would resign his commission in 1883, and again, from personal club notes, we'll see he's still a weapons man until 1887 at least. Now, there are a lot of whispers about Luger's employment in these years. Many say he worked under Verndl or Mannlicher, that he was an employee of OEWG. I've been unable to confirm this with any named primary source. What we do know comes again from Ludwig Lowe, which is where Luger would be employed starting in 1891. Apparently, he was brought in to help sell the new Mauser rifles to the Italian government, thanks to his military background, engineering experience, and fluency in Italian. None of those helped, however, as they were already set on a hybrid of the Mannlicher rifle and their own native design. Already in his first job with Lowe, Luger apparently made a poor impression with Paul Mauser. There is a story out there that Luger attempted to win over the wife of one of the Italian officials with promises of jewelry should his design receive favor. And Mauser didn't care for that. Well, it didn't work out anyway. So Georg was put to work by Lowe, mostly selling rifles, although he did do some engineering of his own. Interestingly, his patents generally seem to be applied to a modified Gewehr 88 style of rifle, which actually may further reinforce the theory that he previously worked under Mannlicher. And one of these patents would seriously anger Paul Mauser yet again. We've discussed this briefly before, but might as well dig into it to be sure. In 1894, Luger patented a safety lug option for bolt-action rifles. The problem is, Mauser had been using this idea since the late 1880s on the various trials guns. Yeah, this guy right here, we've seen him in other episodes, and when it was finally rolled into Mauser's later pattern of guns, Luger would sue him for compensation. Mauser accused Luger of stealing design, having seen it repeatedly thanks to his position as a salesman and demonstrator with the Lowe Group. The matter actually went to court and was decided in Luger's favor in April of 1898, not because there was no evidence for Mauser, but because by his own admission, the rifles in question had all been produced for foreign consideration, for export, and German patents required German prior art. Isidor Lowe, the brother now running the company after Ludwig Lowe's death years ago, had to step in and smooth things over, arranging for a lump sum to be paid to Luger. By the way, whenever I bring up these little concerns about historical figures or businesses, I tend to get some emails. Just to be clear, I'm repeating what I consider to be the best sources that I can find, and I'm not making a personal accusation against anyone. Curiously, with both Luger and Mauser under the same umbrella, you would think that this whole thing wouldn't have been a problem at all. However, Luger's patents were filed at Lowe's expense, as they had a contract with their employee that would reserve the rights to produce them and promised a specific royalty. 1 mark per weapon produced, or 1 mark per 1,000 rounds of ammunition sold. This explains his need to get paid by the subsidiary Mauser, and that second bit is actually a little curious to me as well, because I have not been able to find any specific records on Luger being paid according to ammunition sales, which is a shame because it may have cleared up an issue. According to testimony much later in 1922, Luger claimed to be the original designer of the 7.65 Borchardt cartridge. This went uncontested, and Borchardt was alive. As for the cartridge, basically it's a scaled-down Gewehr 1888 rifle cartridge, and Luger was working closely with said long arm, so it's pretty believable that he could have been the author of the first Parabellum cartridge. At the time, most auto pistol cartridges had a nearly straight wall design with perhaps a slight taper. Luger had gone with the bottleneck case because of its superior obturation, how it sealed on firing. This helped keep powder out of the mechanism. Thankfully, there doesn't seem to have been a patent on the design, or perhaps it wasn't unique enough to warrant one, because Paul Mauser would seize that particular cartridge for himself, keeping the same dimensions and upping the powder. He would work it into the 7.63 Mauser cartridge, which was paired with his new C96 pistol. Take that, Luger. Yep, the two biggest things in autoloading pistols were both Lova products using the same basic cartridge with a change in power. By the way, at this point, I'm going to stop referring to Lova, and I'm going to start referring to DWM. This was, as a reminder, an 1896 decision to break off the arms production side of the massive Lova empire into a more stately named Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionenfabriken. It was also to break free of anti-Semitic scandal leveled at Lova, following issues with the Gewehr 1888's adoption and use. In fairness to Lova, however, these issues seem to have been baked into the design of the rifle and not the execution of the contract. Luger would re-sign anew with the DWM firm, transferring over all of his rights from Lova and obligating any new ones as well. He was also given a fixed retainer of 10,000 marks a year, a salary. Other than designing the C93 cartridge, Luger was also a DWM salesman, particularly good with languages and a fine marksman unto himself, plus having a strong hand in the engineering side of things and sprinkle on a little military service. And yeah, he's an excellent guy to send out to these various trials around the world, which made him intimately familiar with the aforementioned complaints against the Borchardt pistol. All right, we're back on track. Since the original inventor had no interest in updating, Georg was put to the task. Since the goal was Swiss adoption, Luger would actually put a lot of value in the complaints forwarded by the Swiss KTA, their Kriegstechnische Abteilung, I don't speak German, and in particular one Oberst von Orelli. Together they defined the following core problems with the C93 pistol. It was too big, it was too vulnerable to dirt and too vulnerable to rust, and the field disassembly was much too complicated. Yeah, this is not exactly what you'd consider an especially straightforward process, but you'd also expect officers to be the first at it. In the long run, however, you want something that's infantry-proof. Luger's changes to the C93 would be, frankly, sublime. The only problem is we have almost no data on how he came up with his ideas or in what order they were executed. I do know he was asked to try and reuse as many Borchardt parts as possible, and to my knowledge, he used none of them. His patents are even, according to his own later testimony, misleading, by which I mean they were specifically tailored for a singular purpose and intentionally misleading on other features he was not yet ready to protect. Most authors, however, present the patents in the order in which they were filed, which doesn't likely match the development process. It just matches the order in which he wanted to secure things that he thought other people would then try doing. I'm going to very dangerously assume what Luger just might have prioritized, which is shrinking the action and making it reliable first, before adding things like a grip safety. To do that, I'm going to pick and choose some images from a series of his patents ranging from 1898 and 1899. The order, however, is going to get a bit scrambled compared to the filing dates. Now this guy shows a pistol that, to my knowledge, was never actually made, even as a prototype. The patent itself was filed to protect the grip safety. However, it also reveals what might have been his first steps on the Borchardt. Remember, the Borchardt has this crazy snail thingy going on at the rear, which had a hard-to-make clock spring. Here, Luger has replaced it with a simple flat spring set in the rear of the grip, which drags down the center of the link thanks to an S-shaped stirrup arm. Now, according to Luger, even as the patent was filed, he had already worked out a prototype pistol that was secretly shown to Swiss officials. The prototype did not use that rear roller cam that the original drawing depicts. That roller was left in to avoid exposing Luger's real innovation, which was the idea to break the action out of lock by directly impacting the toggle point. He did this with a set of curved camming surfaces milled into the pistol's frame, right on the outside. So just to make that easier to see, the Borchardt was broken open when the rear roller was pitched down, which in turn pitched the toggle link up. The Luger design, however, simply put mechanical force directly on the link, popping it up and forcing an unlocked state. Between this and the flat spring, the Borchardt was greatly shrunk, and reliable operation of the locking mechanism improved. The Borchardt's trigger and sear mechanism was largely preserved, with one big change. On the original, pulling the trigger rotated a semicircular transfer bar, which in turn tipped the sear. We'll see more of the details on this later, while that big old circular rod was taking up a lot of real estate. Luger replaced that system with an L-shaped transfer bar that is frankly difficult to render in 2D, so just remember this bit when we get to our proper 3D animation later. The important part of all this is that Luger's design further sealed up the trigger group while shaving down some more of that gross overly large length. Also apparent right from the start of the patents, the Luger revision has an improved grip angle, 55 degrees, much better feeling in the hand, and providing a natural pointing action, along with great control under recoil. With the flat recoil spring also stuffed in the grip, getting it narrow enough for a human hand did require changing up the cartridge. The result kept the .765 bullet diameter of the Borchardt, but opted for a shorter 21mm case length. Little was lost in terms of muzzle velocity, with lots of gain in ergonomics. The cartridge would come to be called .765 Parabellum after DWM registered the trademark in 1900. This came from the popular Latin phrase "Sivi pacem parabellum," if you want peace, prepare for war, which was applied to both the ammunition and the pistol. And speaking of which, actually back where we started, that grip safety, which would see a number of minor iterations before settling into what we have today. In September of 1898, the new Borchardt Luger pistol was officially shown to the Swiss KTA. In November that same year, a pair of the new Lugers were submitted for trials. These sported a grip safety, but no manual safety whatsoever, chambered the new .765 Parabellum cartridge, but otherwise looked rather like our gun today. Both guns weren't identical. The one I showed was what would later be known as the Standard, but what's now missing is its partner, which apparently had a long barrel and a heavy barrel. It was all around called a heavy model. Other competitors included, but were not limited to, the Roth, the Mannlicher, the Bergmann, of course, and the Mauser C96. Now, the Swiss Commission used a point scoring system in an attempt to better objectively rate the pistols. These were based on features like accuracy, reliability, robustness of construction, handling, ease of stripping and cleaning, ease of loading, rapidity of fire, size and weight, rust and dust resistance, and interchangeability of parts. And the results? Well, I actually already had the guns in order, folks, but let's count up the points. Mauser, 64. Bergmann, 67. Mannlicher, 69. Roth, 79. And Luger, the obvious winner, 95 freaking points, blowing away the competition here. But, of course, it wasn't perfect. The Luger pistol was criticized for having a rough, spongy trigger, the need for firm hand pressure on the grip safety, the awkward narrowness of the grip safety, the difficulty of loading rounds into the magazine, and that it was impossible to single load the pistol without the magazine. Can you tell that automatics are still a new concept? In the end, despite the points, the Luger and Mannlicher were recommended for further study. A grand trial was set up for May of 1899 to be followed by extensive troop trials. When the commission reconvened, it was decided that Mauser, Bergmann, and Roth had made no significant changes to their submitted pistols, so all were completely dropped from consideration. The commission took a brief look at the new Browning 1899 pistol, but didn't particularly want a blowback or its tiny cartridge. Instead, only the Luger, now sporting a manual lockout on the safety grip, literally on the grip, along with other minor changes, mind you, and a new 1899 prototype of what would be the model 1900 Mannlicher, blowback, oh boy, only these two pistols would be tested. And the Swiss KTA was not too happy about the Mannlicher. They didn't want a blowback. The Luger had now very clearly trounced all contenders. It was patently apparent that there would be only one pistol in the field trials, and so the Swiss Commission opted to just speak directly to Georg Luger about their remaining concerns before going on with any more guns. And honestly, the real sticking point was the safety. The Swiss were divided on whether they loved or hated the automatic grip safety, but they were unanimous that they did want a manual option. And that one attached to the grip safety, like literally attached to it, that was not ideal. Luger assured them that he could resolve the matter though. They also wanted the weight under 850 grams without the magazine included. This he was not so sure of. The commission had concerns about telling whether or not the pistol was loaded. They wanted a clear visual that the magazine was inserted and the action was cocked. They also wanted to be able to use blank ammunition reliably for training. To my knowledge, this was never addressed properly. 20 pistols, with as many of the above improvements as possible, were ordered for troop trials. This was fine by Luger because he had already designed most of the required features, as most of the concerns were actually known to him long beforehand. He just hadn't had time to incorporate them into the initial phase of the trial. The result would be what we now call the model of 1899 Trials pistol, now sporting a manual safety lever on the left side rear of the frame. Nice. 20 of these were delivered in October of 1899. Through the winter months, they were tested by various units of the Swiss army, the usual cavalry, artillery, and shooting schools of course, but also the new MG Corps got to try on the Luger. Overall, the new pistols did exceptionally well, and so the commission informed Swiss officials it was time to make room in the budget for a new handgun. In April of 1900, the final meeting of the commission was held to decide on the pistol matter. They still had some reservations though. They still couldn't use blank ammo, and there were some lingering questions about how to carry spare mags. Georg Luger had helpfully suggested soldiers use their pockets. The commission also still found the trigger lacking, its return spring was too delicate, the magazine was still difficult to load with cartridges. However, they felt this was a minor issue. On the safety matter, it was decided both manual and automatic should be retained. Georg Luger promised to deal with what he could, and in the meantime, the Swiss arsenal at Thun had worked up a suitable gunpowder and load for the 7.65 Parabellum cartridge, meaning they would not be dependent on outside production. Official adoption would be approved on May 4th of 1900, declaring this the pistol Ordonnance 1900. Convenient. So, what did they actually get? Let's go ahead and take a look. Alright, we definitely have a Luger pistol, and let's do a quick tour. We have a barrel, our grip, the magazine's located in the grip, we have a grip safety, a manual safety on top of that, and we have a toggle locking action with the trigger here. The toggle lock works by pulling back and open, and then it locks open on empty like we've just seen. Now, we can release the magazine, which thankfully we know is loaded, because the Swiss decided to put a little piece of steel right here, nice and shiny. So if I pop that guy out, we can get a little closer of a look at this guy. Now this guy is actually the later pattern because he's checkered and raised. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you see that we have a spring coiled up inside of there. We have our flashing here, and a wood base that's plugged in the bottom of an otherwise in the white magazine body. In order to load this, you would depress this button, and if I can stay where you guys can see, you would start loading your cartridges. Now I don't have 7.65 on me, but you get the idea. And eventually this gets very stiff and sharp, and it really starts to hurt your thumb. So the Swiss would later complain about that. DWM would actually respond to this complaint with a multi-tool designed to assist loading and act as a screwdriver. It became standard for Lugers going forward, but the Swiss said, nah, our cleaning kit lid works fine. Moving to the top of our gun, we'll see our beautiful Swiss crested sunburst right there, lovely. And we'll see that our bolt is back without the magazine in the way, or if we had had a live cartridge, we can just pull it back and let go, and she'll slam on forward. We have our Deutsch Waffen mark right here, DWM. And we have our grasping scallops, let's say, for the lug. We also see that our overhead extractor is right here, and we have a very flat bolt profile. Let me give you a better look at those lugs. Now this pistol has a fairly weak mainspring, and this one especially has suffered a little damage that I'll show you in a moment. But the way this would work, if you notice the scallops, they're sort of textured on the front, but not on the rear. That's because the way this gun unlocks is short recoil, okay? You fire the gun, and then it recoils just a little bit, at which point this lug acts on this ramp and it pops up ever so slightly, right? Once it's up, that means it's unlocked, and this can travel backwards on its own until it's returned by the spring down inside that we'll see in a moment, and then should go back in the battery, shoving this back forward. We're all good to go, right? So short recoil locking action. The problem is, because the spring was not terrifically powerful, you needed a way to prevent it from sort of slapping down and then bouncing back up and being out of battery. So you put a little part over on this side. This rebound check lever grabs onto a little latch that's kind of hard to see at the moment. Let me actually put this magazine in, rack this back, and right there, a little hook. And then when we let her down, that latch is going to grab hold of it, snap forward, and now the lock can't rise. It's fairly securely held on there. And for a lot of people who are used to regular later Lugers, like the P08, the much more common Lugers, well, what they'll do is they'll grab hold of this guy and try to pinch him open like they're used to, just lifting straight up on the action. But actually what you need to do is pull to the rear. That way you get into the unlock position and then you can roll her open. I've noticed a lot of guys struggling with this 1900 as I've brought it around to show people. Now let's get a little bit deeper in this gun. We have a takedown lever here, which can only be operated when the, for lack of a better word, slide, but in this case it's actually a barrel extension, is all the way back. This again helps to be locked open with the magazine, but you can also just freehand it. You can just get some pressure back and flip this guy down. 1 second, I need to have the grip safety in because if you notice, I can't actually activate the system without holding it. So grip safety in, push back, and flip down. There we go. Once that's down, I can relax and this cover plate can come right on off. And if we look inside the plate, we'll see we've got this little L-shaped bracket. That's that sear I was talking about, the improvement over the Borchardt's sort of quarter round arm. So when we pull the trigger, this guy gets pulled down and pushes in on the sear, which pops it out the rear. Let me show you that a little bit better. So pulling the trigger would tip down on that L shape, which would cause the top to push in on this little peg right here. Now, of course, I have the gun partially disassembled. I'm just showing this as we go, but pushing down on that would flex the back outward, which releases the striker. Now, once all that's happened, this guy is actually under his own spring tension and is our disconnector. So he would then end up behind that L-shaped bracket. This is much easier to see in our animation in a moment, and therefore this whole thing would have to reset before it would pop back out. But you get the general idea until we can get a little deeper with our X-ray specs. Now, let's finish that takedown, because I can just go ahead and pull this upper assembly off from the lower, and we're pretty deep into the gun. This is all you'd need for most service, but let's keep playing for just a moment, because from here, I can just unlock the bolt, and I can push on this pin right here. So simple, my pokey hand can do it. Punk, and pull. And we'll get the bolt right on out. So you can see a little bit more of what I was talking about. This is our striker that wants to forever be forward, and when it is forward, our firing pin strikes the primer. There's our extractor. So whenever we work the action, the actual toggle arm, the forward toggle arm, cocks the striker, see? And then when it returns, normally the striker would be caught on the sear, which is right here, so back on this guy. So if it's caught on it, it can't go forward until we push in on this side, which causes this side to pop out towards you, the viewer, at which point it's going to free, I don't know if you can see down there, it's going to free our striker to fire, so fairly straightforward. Now, the whole system is locked when it's aligned like this, and when the joint breaks, that allows it to fold on up like your elbow, right? And then it's returned to battery by a spring. It's mounted right here. This little S-shaped spring with a bit of a stirrup on the end actually interacts with a pair of flat springs down inside the frame. Having simply unscrewed the bottom screw on the left grip, we can get inside and see that mainspring, although in my case, you might be able to make out that there's some damage. Apparently, When we fired this pistol, we managed to develop a crack and slowly started to see, well, not slowly, instantly started to see that the return to battery wasn't as good. Now, this is not an uncommon thing to happen in these early guns because of the nature of the dual flat spring setup. So, this one is obviously getting a replacement part put in. It's just not available in time for this episode, but at least we managed to get it shot before this piece of damage caught up with us. Now, that main spring comes all the way up until, and I'm sorry, let me see if I can get focus. It terminates in a pair of hooks, which again are very difficult to see. I'm actually using my flashlight to try to light them up in there. This will be more apparent in our animation. While we're here, we also have this guy, which is the hold open for the bolt. He's activated by the magazine, so let me go ahead and put that down in there. If I return the magazine as it rises, especially on this left side, we'll see it tip that guy. Boom, and then therefore it will lock open the action. Alright, I've partially reassembled the gun, and I've exposed the left side by removing the screw for the left side grip panel. Let's go ahead and talk about how the safety works, because there's a blade here that what it does is it blocks the sear from rising. So if I push down on the front, the back cannot come over towards you, the viewer. Now, if I were to have this down, as in I grip it, ooh, look at that guy disappearing, peekaboo, peekadon't. So, push, and obviously the gun can fire. Now that's the automatic grip safety. For the manual safety, it's very simple. There's a lug on the automatic grip safety, and if we flip this guy, well, locked out. Can't push in the manual grip safety. Flip her back around, and yeah, we're good to go. Alright, that's as far as we can probably see into this thing without having to really tear it down, which is sort of pointless anyway, thanks to our animator, Bruno. Let's get a better look.
First, we'll load up our detachable single-stack magazine, conveniently located within the grip. The mag is held in place by a simple and easily accessible thumb latch. Gripping the frame is necessary in order to work the toggle lock back manually, which allows us to feed the first round into the chamber. This is the striker, or firing pin. It's currently sprung forward, but is being retained by this sear. The sear is connected to the trigger by this odd 90-degree angle transfer bar. So, pull the trigger, tip the sear, release the striker to fire the pistol. An extension from the toggle arm then retracts the striker back behind the sear. This small spring-powered extension is the trigger disconnect. Having fired the pistol, the sear recoils with the barrel extension, and on the return, this disconnect impacts the transfer bar and is compressed. This way, the transfer bar cannot press on the sear again until after the trigger has been released. Locking in the Luger is achieved by this toggling bolt assembly, which, when extended in a line, acts as a braced knee joint. The bolt rides in a barrel extension, which in turn recoils down the frame when the pistol is fired. The frame sports a set of sloped camming surfaces. As the toggle joint travels rearward, it impacts these directly and is shoved upwards, breaking itself open and freeing the bolt assembly to now fold up on itself. The bolt is returned by this S-shaped extension, attached to a riveted set of flat springs, which ride in the rear of the grip. The safety is exceedingly simple. Without pressure on the grip, a hook-shaped extension blocks the lateral movement of the sear, which means the pistol cannot be fired. The manual safety lever just locks over the grip safety, again blocking the sear. Otherwise, this is a pretty straightforward system. Our extractor pulls the spent cases to the ejector. And in the same area, we can see a bolt hold open, which is raised by the projection off the magazine follower to lock the bolt open on empty, signaling a need to reload. Okay, let's go shoot it.
Does feel nice. I've heard people say the Swiss 1900 was the first Marshall automatic handgun to see adoption, but we actually know better. The Italian 1899 was technically contracted for at the end of 1898, although it was Navy only. There is an old story about Georg Luger floating around out there that the day after his pistol was accepted by the Swiss, he literally ran to the patent office to finally secure his toggle lock action in a patent. While not 100% accurate, it does sort of tell the right story though. He actually filed a little ahead of the results back in March in Britain and the United States. Following the May adoption, his attorney filed in Switzerland, while he literally ran and filed in Germany. This patent, by the way, covers the direct cam toggle lock, the location of the mainspring and its S-shaped stirrup link, plus the hold-open device, and the particulars of the sear arm that make it a 2-ish stage trigger pull. The filing dates, of course, were to maximize the amount of time he would receive patent protection, but that delay comes with a risk. Someone else might beat you to your own patent, and Luger should well have known this given his clash with Paul Mauser. Well, karma might have come for him in the end, because there would be a massive delay on the approval of the US filing. You see, someone had already patented a direct action toggle lock. This nobody US inventor in search of an automatic shotgun had the idea of using camming surfaces directly on the hinge point of the toggle lock. It's very familiar. Same as Georg Luger, actually. And his patent was filed back in May of 1899. This situation severely threatened the Luger pistol in the lucrative American market. And that inventor's name? John Moses Browning. Dang. By the way, thanks to the excellent research of biographer Nathan Gorenstein, we now have a much clearer picture of Browning's entire life. His new book has in many ways changed the key details of Browning's relationship with FN and his fallout with the Winchester. While I'll have to one day clean up our existing episodes thanks to this new knowledge, I'm happy to say that having read his book, I find the story much more realistic than the previous, and I highly recommend that you check out the same. Fun fact, it was Browning's toggle lock shotgun that initially put him at odds with Winchester, and a big reason for the latter's delay was the ensuing legal battle with Georg Luger, who actually at first just sent a legal demand, one Browning's lawyer believed was meant to set up a sort of peace deal, leaving Luger open to selling in the US and Browning open to selling his toggle shotgun in Europe. However, he worded the matter very aggressively and demanded Browning essentially cede his patent, leaving him no real protection for other devices on the same principle. John Moses Browning, of course, did not care for this arrangement, so the matter was disputed. Suffering a lack of clear evidence, Luger would attempt to change tactics, and in August of 1900 asked that the patent case be dissolved, as neither his US patent nor Browning's was valid at all, because they were both just reworks of earlier toggle locks, which sort of ignores the direct camming part of the patent being the critical issue. Browning's attorney and the patent office agreed that this was very silly and pushed the case on into court. There, Luger accused Browning of having stolen his design thanks to having heard about it through a mutual acquaintance. I wonder if Luger was aware of the irony here. His story goes like this. He showed the new pistol action to Hans Tauscher, a German sales agent for both DWM, which if you recall also owned Fabrique Nationale. So that means Tauscher spent some time in Belgium, and in traveling between there and the US, he managed to share a steamship with Browning. Tauscher and Luger swore that Tauscher got into a deep conversation with Browning about his desire to make an auto-loading shotgun. Tauscher mistakenly believed that Luger had already filed his patents, and so that the toggle breech, which, is perfectly safe and covered in Europe and in the US, could be offered to Browning as a solution for a shotgun problem, and in doing so would force Browning to have to work with DWM. This is a win-win. Browning said, nope, not a lick of that was true. He flatly stated that Tauscher wasn't an engineer, just a salesman, so why would he even be talking to him about engineering problems in the first place? Woof. Browning's lawyer helpfully pointed out some other details in his favor. First, John Moses claimed to have conceived of the idea back in 1894, having discussed it with his brother. They later built a working prototype in 1897, which Browning's lawyer helpfully pointed out that Tauscher had likely seen during his visit to Ogden in March of 1899, just a month before Luger filed his American patent. The implication here is that Luger was the thief, but we know from his work with the Swiss that this could not be the case, actually. In October of 1901, the court ruled in favor of Browning, which should have been where they left it. Instead, in 1905, Browning would work with Colt to file an injunction against Luger's pistol in the US. This battle was fought for 3 more years before it was lost in the US District Court of New York, who declared both systems derivative. Luger got his way in the end. Returning to the year 1900, however, and the Swiss, a contract would be hammered out over several months of negotiation. DWM's initial offer was for 2,000 pistols at a price of 51 marks each. They later reduced this to 46 marks apiece if the order came before the end of July. The matter wasn't settled until August, but I believe the lower number remained, as we do see this same figure turn up in future German contracts. Due to budgeting issues, the 2,000 unit lot was split up, with only 600 in the first fiscal year. The C-93 production line was reworked for the new Borchardt Luger, and deliveries to Switzerland would begin in May of 1901. The balance wasn't complete until mid-1902, by which time at least 8,000 commercial guns and a variety of other trials pistols were already being sent around the world. Case in point, the US cavalry would test 1,000 of these early Luger pistols, and I suspect that they were very influential, but that's a story we're working on for another day. In August of 1902, another 2,000 pistols were ordered, but this time only 1,500 were to be assembled by DWM, but not finished. This was done by Waffenfabrik Bern. The last order was for just 1,500, now delivered as part sets for assembly at Bern. This should make for 5,000 pistols in total, but DWM would produce roughly 200 more. Those would be what's known as extra series pistols. These were guns bought or assembled outside of the Army's normal inventory. They were not meant for general issue, and instead served out various tasks such as teaching aids or gifts for important officials. The first batch of 600 pistols were proofed with the Swiss cross, and after that, a cross over the letter V for the director of Waffenkontrolle, Major Vogelsang. Now, despite the low numbers and scant few years, the Swiss 1900s did receive some updates. The initial follower button was quite flat. After 800 or so pistols, it was domed somewhat and checkered. The manual safety actually saw a number of minor revisions. Starting off checkered, the profile changed slightly over time to make it easier to operate one-handed. Ultimately, it landed on a slotted pattern like my pistol today. The grip safety proved to be a constant point of complaint and was widened to apply a more even pressure on the hand. And on those last 1,500 pistols, the ones assembled in Switzerland, well, they decided to try a new trigger as well. This was widened considerably, which didn't have much of a tactical reasoning, but was more in lines with the Swiss obsession on target shooting in field. A relief cut was added for the extractor at the top of the chamber, and due to problems with the flat mainsprings, the thickness of one or both varies a fair bit from contract to contract. We've certainly seen that issue. The overwhelming problem was being a failure to return to battery, though. Okay, I almost think the Luger was still in its infancy and was quickly working through a plethora of minor issues at the time of the adoption of the 1900, but it's a good thing that Switzerland was a neutral nation, or we might be discussing service issues. As it was, I sadly don't have much in the way of any sort of combat assessment of this particular handgun here. I will say, however, they did seem to briefly consider whether or not they had missed the bus on adopting a stocked pistol. So a handful of trials models were made around 1911. These clamped over the heel of the pistol and were apparently not worth the effort, as they were never adopted. A lot of these minor issues with the Model 1900 would be investigated and slowly eliminated due to repeated trials across the world, not necessarily in Switzerland. The end result would be a Luger that we're all more familiar with, something called the new model. And we'll actually be talking about this evolution more in our next episode. However, Switzerland would eventually follow along, adopting their own new model and all of its improvements as well. Roughly double the number would be acquired over the 1900. The 1900/06 would be also produced domestically when the Great War interrupted German exports. These in turn were replaced by the 06-29, which were refined for cost savings and served on until after World War II. All of the Lugers would eventually be replaced by the SIG 210, adopted in late 1948. While plenty of nations investigated this old model Luger, as they would later call it, the 1900, most would only finally bite after the introduction of the improved new model. To my knowledge, only one other nation specifically contracted for our gun today. Bulgaria ordered 1,000 for issue to officers in 1903. They would later also upgrade to a new model, and in World War II convert most of their pistols from 7.65 to 9mm Parabellum, making examples like this one extremely rare. Now there were unofficial purchases, commercial purchases in large numbers. Russia would be a major buyer, with perhaps several thousand commercial examples being purchased for or by officers. Unfortunately, there isn't as much of a paper trail there as we would like. Wrapping out, our original inventor, Hugo Borchardt, had distracted himself for a number of years in the gas appliance market, but that sort of deflated, and he attempted to return to firearms. Most notably, he would work on a toggle-locked rifle, which would compete for German attention against, well, Georg Luger's own design. Borchardt never seemed to connect with another hit, however, and passed away in 1924. Following the initial success of his pistol, Georg Luger was now responsible for its worldwide demonstration and material improvement. His title would change to Chief Draftsman, and for a time he was very involved in selling the Maxim into countries like Serbia. I'd say more, but we're going to check back in with him in our very next episode. Alright, that's a much better understanding of the origins of the ubiquitous Luger, and while we won't go all the way to the German P08 next episode, we will set sail with a naval model. In the meantime, let's visit with Mae and get her opinion on this, the original OG Luger. Alright, once more, we've made room for Mae.
Hello.
And we have just enough room for this massive honking, no, it's a pretty good handgun. Although, it's a full-size service handgun.
Yeah, it's pretty big in terms of some of the other pistols we've handled for the era.
That's fair. Now, this is the Swiss Model 1900. One of the few examples we will see of a old model Luger.
Yep.
Most of what you've seen in the wild is a new model Luger, so there's going to be some key differences. But before we get into all that, what's it like being handed a Luger for the first time? Not that this is what happened.
No, it's definitely not what happened, but it's interesting. So let me turn this around for the camera. If I were to cut this gun in half, and I were to look at the bottom half of this gun, just starting there, looks very modern, but there's a lot of features here I'm familiar with. A grip safety, a mag release button, trigger seems to be in the right place, and a manual safety. Well, that's in the top half. But when I look at the top half section, this is really weird looking because I'm used to slide operated guns that I then grip the backside of it and I actuate oh, no, wait, nothing's happening. What is going on here? What do I do to make this gun move? Wait, let me pull back on this. Miss
Modern Shooter. Let's pretend it's 1905. We'll give you a couple extra years to work with.
Okay.
Give me that same analysis.
The same analysis?
Yeah, splitting it in half, what do you see?
It kind of makes me think of maybe like a Mannlicher 1905 or
No, not reminding you. You said you're very familiar with the bottom half and the top half looks completely alien.
Okay.
Now I'm saying go back to like 1905.
Yeah.
Disregarding just Browning's pistols, what does the bottom half look like? Familiar or unfamiliar?
Well, unfamiliar just in terms of all the nice features combined in a really tight area. That's weird.
One-handed use, yes.
Yeah, it's really nice, and that's unusual.
The top half, does that look unfamiliar or familiar?
Well, it looks sort of familiar in that it's a block with the barrel sticking out, which Glicenti-esque maybe?
Right.
Kind of
well,
like that.
That wasn't around yet, but Bergmann's.
No. Yeah,
and a lot of other experimentals.
And then the Borchardt.
No, the Borchardt works like that.
Yeah, I know, but like...
Oh, well, of course it's going to look like the Borchardt.
It's already around, so that's...
It is a refined Borchardt.
That's what's already around. And I'm being like, oh, it's the Borchardt.
It reminds me of the thing that it is. So...
I got him, you see?
The point being is you have a recoiling barrel with barrel extension.
Right.
In some sort of breech block.
Right.
Now, we would traditionally think the breech block is something we can just grab and pull.
Which is what we're used to, but obviously this is just the frame. That's not going to happen.
What's it got instead?
It's got this toggle system, which, depending on how new your Luger is, you might try to operate this differently. So on newer models, which we have handed this pistol to shooters who have handled newer Lugers, and they're so used to it, they just pull up on the toggle to actuate the system. Oh, that's not happening with this guy. You actually have to pull it back a little bit, and then you can pull up, if I actually get a good grip on it, in order to open the toggle.
Yeah, and that's because of the anti-bounce lever that's on the side, which is also sort of a hand-me-down from the fact that this is adapted from the Maxim machine gun.
Yep.
So if you were the sort of person who was at least in ordnance, the top half of this would seem very familiar. You'd be like, oh, okay, recoiling action. Oh, there's a Maxim toggle in here. I know how that works. Oh,
True.
They've made it very compact. I like that, right? So it's very interesting because the upper half of this gun, when it first came out, would have looked the most normal.
Right.
We think it looks the most alien.
Yeah, it looks incredibly bizarre.
The lower half of this gun would have looked more alien
Yep.
in the sense that it was very revolutionary. Ergonomic grip, by the way. How's that feel?
Yeah. It feels pretty fantastic, actually. It feels, well, let me put this guy down. Pop the mag, pop it down. Ba-da-ba. Yeah, it feels kind of like a point shooter almost. Like right where I'm pointing is right where I'm aiming. That's a really solid grip angle. It feels good and it points where I'm aiming.
Yeah.
You can't ask for more than that.
This is not a 90-degree angle bullshit thing like we've seen so many of before.
Oh, no.
This is a contoured, human hand adapted grip.
My webbing fits perfectly in there. It bows out a little bit at the bottom, so it just follows my actual grip, my hand grip itself.
It's the contours of a pointing hand. If
Yeah.
you point your hand and leave your fingers
well
open.
in the palm.
Right.
Love it.
Yeah, that's critically important because that's not something that was happening all the time back then.
Nope.
Now, you have that beautiful grip. You have the toggle lock.
Yep.
All right, let's run it down from there.
Features.
Yeah, let me just do a feature set. I'm getting all out of order, but go ahead.
Yeah. So getting into the features on this guy, first gripping it, that grip safety feels, it's not hard to depress, but there's a lot of travel in there, and it almost feels like it wants to bite the webbing of my hand just because of how it has to press in, I want to say.
No, it's never actually bitten mine.
No, it hasn't bitten mine either, but
it
like,
makes you worried, doesn't it?
a little bit. I just can't, it honestly is weird to me how much travel there is on that grip safety itself. Now, I'm not having to grip it hard, like I said, not like what's the one that has the front grip safety on
The
it?
modern one?
Yeah.
P7.
Yeah, it's not like that where it's actually kind of stiff. This is actually, it's pretty easy to depress. You just have to make sure you depress it all the way.
Right. Although I will say as a modern shooter, if I take a nice loose two-handed grip with something like that, I find that I haven't quite disengaged the sear all the way. And then
It could still possibly
still
operate
fire,
in action, yeah.
But what'll happen is I'll feel the safety wiggling underneath me.
Yeah, that might bite the webbing of your hand a little bit.
Or just annoy the crap out of you.
Oh, that too. And then mag release button, I can press it with my one hand. Yes, I have to break my grip just a little bit, but that is a really positive drop every time. Well, it's because I said that. That's the first time I had that happen. But honestly, I don't think I depress it all the way if I do if I press it gently.
You can snag it.
It can snag it. But positive pop, it wants to fall free with gravity. That's
really
pretty
good,
rad.
especially for the era of heel releases.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. And then we've got a manual safety up here as well. You know, not just the grip safety. Safety on, very easy. Pretty easy to do when I'm pointing.
Okay, put
It's
the
the
safety on.
safety. Yeah.
You got it on?
Yep.
The bad
I know
guy.
where you're going.
Camera bad guy.
Okay, so I'm on this camera. Ready? Camera bad guy. Okay. It's like, oh God. Ha!
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully I got him.
Yeah, that's pretty slow.
Right. Unfortunately, from the actual firing grip, it's a little bit awkward for me to wrap my thumb up and around, and I have to break my grip even further to do that.
However,
But
we have learned something.
from the draw, it seems to be better. So I'm down here. I'm getting ready. Oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah, you gotta do it from the vertical.
Yeah, it's actually much better to have it down here because my hand's already in a position that I'm grabbing the gun. So it's already not quite perfectly seated on there. So I just grab it with the safety in mind, flip off, and draw. And I'm ready to go.
I've actually tried reading for this, and I'm still keeping an eye out whenever I get into old ordnance reports and stuff. And if anybody sees anything, let me know. I've never seen any of the old ordnance specifically name when they use the safety.
That would be interesting to find out.
Because on some of these guns, it seems like it makes a lot more sense that they're setting
Doing it
it from
the
safe to
draw.
fire
Yep.
on the draw or even in the holster. Like you're getting a hold of the gun, you're going to fire, and then you're drawing and you're shooting, which is not the safest way to use a safety.
No.
It's not recommended at all. It's recommended to get it up, get it in the correct direction, then flick it off and go. That's the modern understanding.
Right.
But they didn't always do things the way we do things. So it just seems like a lot of these ergonomics make more sense if you're working from the holster.
I'd be curious to see if anyone has any ordnance records on that. That'd be nice to find out.
Yeah.
But aside from that, feature-wise, I mean, the trigger feels like it's in a pretty good spot.
But you're not pulling it yet. Don't pull that trigger.
I'm not doing
Don't pull
it
that
yet.
trigger.
I'm not doing it yet.
How hard is it to use the toggle? You mentioned how it works, but is it hard?
Unfortunately, it doesn't feel smooth. What do you want?
I want the magazine. There you go. Show them. Give it the rack.
So it can be pretty smooth, and you can get pretty smooth with it, but it doesn't feel.
Well, you didn't let go. You gotta let go.
Oh, you want me to let go?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, go. That's pretty fast. Do it again.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
No, it doesn't seem too bad.
No, it's not. It's only if you try to go slow with it that there's like a loping that can happen with it because you're pulling back slightly and then up. And
I think the more you think about it, the more it screws up. Because for me, I just think of it as starting a lawnmower and I'm just pulling it to the rear.
Kind of like
so I take my two fingers and I set them down over there deep onto the knuckle and I just pull the rear until it stops and I slip them off.
Oh, yeah. And then when it's locked open, honestly, it's just better to, instead of using your fingers, just slap it down.
Yeah. And so what she's saying is, because they get this in video game animations, kind of weird.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't just do the slap.
I've seen a number of video games where it locks open on empty, and then they grab it like a big pinch, you know?
Well, who would do that?
And then, you're just going to get slap and
go.
Yeah. So...
Video game designers, if any of you have watched this, fix that.
I will say on this one, more so than the later ones, that sort of bring it back means that you have a very small surface area on two fingers.
Yes.
You could also do it this way and back too. That's fine, which gives you a little more. But it's a little awkward because now it's sort of asymmetrical and you're not clamping, you're pulling back. So then you pull back and you let it slip.
I feel like it's more effort to grip that way too.
And I get a little uncomfortable feeling from where I've let the... not checkered, but the actual serrations.
Yeah.
Is it making me bleed? Is somebody that works outside with their hands all day going to notice? No. But it's one of those things that tells you, because you're getting a little pushback from it, that it's not ergonomically efficient, I guess I should say.
That's fair.
Because it's twisting in your hand in a way that makes your hand have to slip on the knuckle in order to get it to work right. Does that make sense?
I think it's easier with two fingers. Yeah. I agree. But that's pretty much it feature-wise for this guy, I think.
Okay, then I guess we're on to shooting it.
Maybe. We just might be. So shooting this guy, I've loaded her up, I've racked the action, I've taken our safety off, I'm ready to go. I light up my sights. They're actually pretty tall for their time. They're not too bad.
I consider them very good for the time.
Now, and we talked about this, I remember if we talked about it now or before, but...
No, we haven't mentioned the balance issue.
The balance issue, yeah. Well, it's sort of not an issue. It is and it isn't, I guess is the better way to phrase it.
It depends on what you're doing.
So, if I'm just holding it here and I'm getting ready to go, it actually feels very comfortable because the balance point on this guy, and I'll show it to this camera, it's almost, right there. It's almost like right here, almost like really close to the actual toggle knobs back here.
And that's at your last round. The more rounds you have in it, the more it's going to rate to the rear.
Right.
And it's going to kind of walk forward a little bit. But
so maybe it rebalances out better?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it's generally considered to be neutrally balanced.
And I would agree with that assessment. It is pretty neutrally balanced. And when I'm just holding it, shooting it like a pistol, it actually doesn't feel off. Now... do I feel like it would be off if maybe I was moving or if I was on a horse or something like that? It's possible. I have to wonder that.
This is a hesitation that Mae has because of our Walker episode and some of the things that people were talking about on it, which is that the heavy barrel of the Walker acted to sort of gyroscope. Well, I don't know if it's gyroscopic, but it acted as a stabilizer. Weight stabilized. Think of this like if you're familiar with videography, they'll hang a pole with some weights on it off the bottom of a camera to stabilize the camera so there's less shakiness on the camera.
Yep.
Well, same idea. If you have that mass, there's a delay in inertia, right? So if you have this big massive revolver that you hang out in the wind, and then you're bobbing up and down on the horse, the barrel's taking a little bit longer to catch up with that.
Right.
It's
and that's what I'm thinking
it's mass
could be an
stabilized
issue.
In place, right? So
just me handling it on the range that day didn't really feel like it was that big of a deal. But if I felt like I was moving or something was moving me, maybe.
Well, the neutral balance is great when you want to be able to point.
Yes.
Right? But if you're on unstable surface, so if you're stable and you're just pointing, it's great. If you're unstable, so horseback, deck of the ship, whatever.
Yeah, I was just thinking on a boat.
Horseback's a big one because cavalry was where a lot of pistol was going, right? A lot of nations, like the U.S. in particular, struggle with the Luger with cavalry, and some of it had other reasons, but some of it may have also been that they didn't like trying to stay accurate on a gun that the barrel's not trying to hold its position. As a matter of fact, the barrel's flipping around however little bit it wants.
Right.
I tend to find that I have a little trouble getting back on for follow-up shots with this gun.
I could see that.
Because once it sort of rocks back and I got to bring it down, I'm used to having some barrel mass there.
That to help stabilize it. Literally to help stabilize.
I start tweaking the front sight.
I could see that.
Way too easily. But if you have good hand control, then you're going to love it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fair. I actually kind of enjoyed it personally, but we can have differing opinions. We're not the same people.
That's fine.
Pulling the trigger. It holds up to its name, unfortunately. The trigger is mushy.
Wait, it has a name?
Well, its reputation is a better way to put it. It unfortunately is pretty mushy pull through all the way. And I get it. It's acting against like a transfer bar, which works against the disconnector, then the sear.
Let's go through this. You ready?
Okay.
Okay, you pull the trigger.
All right.
And then what happens?
It pushes against a transfer bar opposite direction.
Right,
yeah.
like 90 degrees that way.
Right, which then pushes against the disconnector.
Which is nested inside of...
it's floated or nested inside of like the sear, which then is pushed out of the way. Long. And then releases the striker, which then fires the gun.
So it's like 4 surface interactions.
That sear is huge, yeah. There's no way that could have been smooth.
No, it's 4 surface interactions, a 90-degree turn, then a giant teeter-totter. And then all this tolerance stacking between and blah, blah, blah. It is very much like a bullpup trigger on a not incredibly designed bullpup.
There was no way that was going to be amazing.
Yeah. No. So they're kind of soggy triggered.
Yeah.
They have a weird two-stagedness to them, too.
Kind of. But you're pulling through separate pieces, which are then acting on others, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So what else you got for me? You fired it.
Yeah.
Then what happens when you pull the trigger?
So we've actually gone boom on this guy, right? The recoil is snappier than I'm expecting, but I remember this being a thing on the P08 back in the day. I have a feeling it's due to this toggle action that, I have the first bit of recoil and then the toggle action. It happens so fast that I want to say I'm possibly perceiving it. I don't know, but I want to say I'm feeling like it's just more snap to than I'm anticipating because this action is coming back and up over like the backside of my hand. That's got to add to it for the recoil.
Yeah, you actually have recoiling components leaving the center of gravity, like going out and away.
Right.
That's going to have an effect, and I agree. It feels like almost... I can't feel the two-stagedness of it, but I suspect there's a two-stagedness to it.
Yeah,
Which, by the way, there is for any gun that's throwing mass around.
Oh, yeah, no, but this one feels like it's such a separate thing of the recoil, kind of, I want to say.
I'm not used to having mass move further away from the center.
Right.
And then halt way high up.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
I can't explain it, but it definitely does feel like it's something that there's more recoil to it than what they're shooting.
No, it's not terrible recoil.
No, it's just more.
No. I think the problem is I suspect that it could be, without all that mass moving around, it could be a better shooter because it's actually not the highest bore axis. It's a fairly low bore axis for the period. Oh, yeah, it's like
right there at the top of my hand.
Yeah, that's very modern shooting in a lot of ways.
Right.
It's a weird sensation, though.
Yeah, very strange.
So, how do you feel about the cartridge? Because we're not shooting 9mm.
No, we're shooting 30 Luger out of this guy. Definitely doesn't feel as powerful as 9mm, but my accuracy was pretty high up there, and I kind of enjoyed 30 Luger in general. Like, it seemed pretty smooth shooting. It's
not as powerful as the 30 caliber Mauser cartridge.
No.
But 7.65 Parabellum was the original Parabellum. Mm-hmm. I find that I would probably agree with the authorities at the time that a small caliber moving at that speed, because it moves faster than 9mm to my knowledge.
Right, but doesn't seem to have as much stopping power.
Yeah, and this is the problem. So the U.S. and other countries became obsessed with stopping power to the point that they were losing fundamentals in terms of being able to get follow-up shooting done, right? And especially in the modern context, we've really come around to this idea of volume of fire being much preferable to accuracy of fire to a degree. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're completely missing,
then that's a whole
full auto,
story. Yeah.
But the idea now is in terms of, because this is a defensive handgun.
Right.
It's very interesting. It's a military handgun.
And I've got 8 rounds. That's pretty bad.
It's used for warfare. Mm-hmm. But the same concept, it's the same concept as a personal defense weapon, which is where a lot of the science is sort of being talked about now. Mm-hmm. The idea being, it's much better to go ahead and get a couple rounds into somebody in a grouping of some sort than it is to just hit them once, even if it's a big bullet.
Right.
The problem is when you're dealing with revolvers, Follow-up shots are generally slow. You have very high bore axis, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
You only have 6 rounds, so being able to get that grouping in a hurry is very difficult. However, with a semi-automatic, we're now entering that realm where we don't have to worry about a double-action trigger every time.
Nope.
So we can shoot somebody a couple times very, very quickly.
And we have more rounds with 8 in this guy.
Right.
Pretty good.
So this is a funny thing because the US and Britain get made fun of for this, but at the time of revolvers, it's actually pretty valid to want a 1-shot stopper or a 2-shot stopper because you have to do a lot of personal training and work to land multiple shots in any sort of grouping with those old revolvers.
Right, I would agree. It definitely need to be a bigger stopper for those guys.
This is much easier to do it. So they go all the way down to 30, which at that point, I don't know that you're getting the terminal effect that you want on an 8-round magazine because it's not that many more rounds either. We're not moved into double stack.
No.
So
we're not savage territory.
We're going to see next time that the government's asked for a different cartridge and we're given one, 9mm Parabellum.
Ooh.
But that's for another time.
Yeah.
So the gun is very modern.
Right.
It can be worked easily with one-handed.
Yep.
Reliable operation.
Fairly reliable, yep.
The only thing is it does have a tendency, because this is the old model, and this is something that would be improved on the next one, it has a tendency to not go all the way in the battery. But that seems to be rare. It uses a diminutive 30 caliber cartridge.
Yep.
I wouldn't say diminutive, actually, but a fast-moving, but not Mauser fast 30 caliber cartridge.
Sure.
How would you feel about having something like this by the time of World War I, which tends to be what our comparison is, like it's our trial period? Is this a comfortable handgun for you in a battlefield scenario?
I think it probably would be very comfortable because, frankly speaking, it's far better than a lot of its competitors in that I have not a 32 caliber semi-automatic pistol.
All right, we've already cleared all the 32s, and some of those were yeses.
Yes. And then on top of that, it's got a lot of modern features to it. That mag release, it's got double safety if I want to be extra safe, which that was something the military greatly valued.
You're going to have a spare mag.
Right. And then on top of that, it's got a decent enough cartridge in there. Well, I mean, skipping from 32. And then I've got 8 rounds. That's pretty great. And the ergonomics on this feel fantastic as a shooter.
Right. So
There's
you feel
a lot
highly
of
confident that you're able
pluses.
to draw, point, shoot, and then with, let's say, 3 rounds, stop a threat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I can't see this being an issue.
Yeah, I can't argue with it either. The Luger, I believe, is a far more influential gun than it gets credit for, especially with that lower layout, man. This setup down here, having the magazine release right behind the trigger,
Yep.
and where your thumb can drop in on it.
That in and of itself is already revolutionary to me.
Right. It inherited from the, by the way, some of these are Borchardt inheritances. I'm sorry. We'll talk more about the Borchardt when we can get our hands on one.
Yes.
But having the detachable magazine in the grip and over the Borchardt having an ergonomic grip, which means designing a cartridge that can do the job but also fit inside of here and still be strong. The metal has to be thick, you know what I mean? So trying to get an ergonomic shape while also having all of this feed through your hand grip, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
A huge
Detachable mag fed. Whereas we were handling things like the Mannlicher 1905, we're having to stripper clip load that.
deal. Right. So
That's pretty ingenious.
yeah, all that alone, very, very modern. Now, the interesting thing that we're going to see in a future episode is these guns go into the hands of U.S. trials, along with later versions of this gun. But really, the old model was the first and most numerous that the U.S. saw. So when you see the Swiss one, imagine being a U.S. ordnance officer looking at this stuff. And you're also being shown, and some of you probably know this, you're just starting to be shown Browning's pistols as done by Colt. So the 1900 and then the 1902.
Okay.
When we get to those episodes, I can't wait to show you the deficiencies in those handguns that this proved until they could finally overcome it.
You're going to make some people mad.
But I highly say, I without a doubt, I say the Luger is responsible for our reliance on having the magazine release set up this way and having a natural ergonomic grip. I think those two features heartily come from the Luger.
Also, I love the bottom of the mag. It's got those little bulbous round circles that are...
for being able to strip it out if it's stuck.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Excellent addition there.
One little extra thing.
Yeah.
Just some sort of traction instead of a little toe or like fingernail breaker.
Perfect. Love it. I hate the toes.
All right. Well, it got a resounding yes. It's more influential than you think, as we're going to prove later on in other episodes.
Haha.
And we're going to talk more about Lugers next time, so I think we should call it here.
Probably.
Do you have any other thoughts on this guy? Just anything?
It's overall very beautiful, I will say that. It's a good finish on it.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
That they're beautiful. Mm-hmm. I don't see it.
What? What's wrong with you?
I think they're very odd looking to me because, and I know I'm dragging it out now a little bit, but just to point this out, the bottom half is very pretty to me because it's very ergonomic and swoopy, and the trigger guard is very beautiful in the way it's set up. But up here is just...
You think it's ugly, don't you?
I do. I
know. I could tell it in his voice. He was hesitating on saying the word ugly.
I can see, just looking at it, I can see the takedown system and plate. I can see the sear exposed. I can see the safety exposed. I can see... like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
You can't turn
6.
off your mechanical brain with this.
No, I see
You're just
6,
looking at it being like, there's so many
7?
points at which this could go wrong.
I just see so many moving pieces.
And you should not see that.
And what looked to me to be fairly delicate pieces. Now, we know in hindsight it ran fine, and it did fine. There's actually this is something we covered in our Luger PO8 episode. Mm-hmm. But these things shed dirt very well because it's fine if they get packed with mud. The mud just falls right back out of the locking system.
Right.
But... it seems mechanically complex to me, to a point that is not what I would call beautiful because it's all sticking out in various directions. It's not symmetrical. It's sticking out randomly.
And you made Bruno 3D animate this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
I don't think Bruno finds them beautiful anymore either, I bet.
Probably not.
If you asked him. But no, the bottom half is gorgeous, but that top half is just, I think it's practically covered in warts if you think about it mechanically. Mm-hmm. But... I understand why people think of it as an elegant in profile, but you have to you need to backlight the heck out of that sucker so that you don't see all those details. Yeah, that's me.
He's got his opinions.
I think the later Bergmans are more attractive looking.
Kind of, they are pretty.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that's it. Hope you enjoyed this one, guys. Stay after the credits for updates, and otherwise, have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
I suspect our recent Minute of May might have given away the surprise for this holiday season. But yes, thanks to our friends at Manticore Arms, the path to the 1911 is finally open. Of course, we still have some Luger history to cover first. In the meantime, don't forget there's always more behind-the-scenes stories for our patrons. So come on by if you're curious. Otherwise, thank you all for the support. Hope you all had a happy Halloween.